medalist.
Alysa Liu.
Alysa Liu.
Alysa Liu, everybody!
Winning isn't all that, and neither is losing. It's just something that happens. It's the outcome. But what matters is the input and the journey.
What would you say to your younger self?
Nothing.
Really?
Yeah, I
Why?
people ask me all the time, what would you say to your younger self? Like, nothing. She's got it. She'll figure it out. She'll go through it, and like, I don't want to mess that up.
Who is her therapist? See, this is one of the main questions people have for Alysa Liu after watching her perform at the 2026 Winter Olympics. And honestly, I was thinking the same, because when you see Alysa skate, what stands out the most isn't the sheer talent or the jumps, but rather it's the pure joy, the freedom, the sense that she actually wants to be there. And this energy is surprisingly rare in elite sports, especially in sports like figure skating. See, a lot of times when you're watching competitive skating, the athletes look intensely focused and sometimes even emotionally guarded. But Alysa Liu looked like she was just having fun the entire time. And that is why people weren't just impressed by her talent, but also her mindset. And that's what I want to discuss and analyze today. Now, before I go on any further, hi, my name is Garland Green. I'm a longtime journalist and content creator, and this is my new account where I talk about media literacy, mental health, relationships, and pop culture. So feel free to follow and share. First, let's start with context. One of the most surprising parts of Alysa Liu's story is how quickly she reached the top and how quickly she walked away. See, at just the age of 13 years old, Liu became the youngest ever US national champion in figure skating, and thus immediately becoming one of the most talked about athletes in sports. And by the age of 16, she had already competed in the 2022 Beijing Olympics, and only a month later, she won the bronze at the World Championship. Now, for most athletes, those milestones would mark the beginning of a long career. But for Alysa Liu, that marked the end of one chapter. And shortly after that world medal, she announced that she was going to step away from competitive skating entirely. And part of that shift happened because of the pandemic.
When COVID hit, my career actually kind of changed a lot. That was my first day off, actually. You know, that one day turned into weeks, and I was like, I kind of don't want the rinks to open up again. I was in that bubble for so long, and COVID kind of let me step outside of it and look at it from a different perspective. I thought like the only way was I had to quit.
If you didn't already know, Alysa Liu actually studied psychology while attending UCLA during her break from competitive skating.
And yes, psychology in school really did help. I hope that, you know, with all this attention, I can at least raise awareness about like mental health in sports and mental health in general.
And ironically, her gap year from skating was to go to college. Now, I can't say that her studying psychology was the sole reason behind her shift in mindset, but I do think it helps explain why she seems to approach the sport very differently than many other athletes out there. Because the more you learn about psychology, the more you learn about yourself. And through that learning, you can then apply it to your day-to-day life to improve it. So while other athletes primarily focus on honing in on their physical performance, Alysa was able to significantly improve her mentality as well, which is very important when competing in something that is highly competitive and stressful for most. Additionally, what helped Alysa get back into the sport was reframing her mindset and changing her relationship with the sport entirely. And to understand why that matters, we first have to talk about the culture of figure skating. See, figure skating isn't just about athletic ability, it's also about aesthetics. And there are unspoken expectations about how skaters should look, how they should carry themselves, and how they should embody a certain type of femininity on the ice. And for decades, the sport has been associated with strict expectations around body image and dieting, which results in many skaters feeling pressured to maintain extremely thin bodies in order to stay competitive. However, Alysa pushed back against that culture. And at one point, she said something that immediately caught people's attention.
No one's gonna starve me.
No one's going to starve me. Because in a sport where restriction has historically been normalized, choosing not to participate in that system is actually an act of autonomy. And she was able to do this by not only being on a very strict diet, but also choosing her own music, her own outfits, and other decisions alike, rather than always going with what others tell her to do.
I was dreading going to the rink every day. I did not want to be there, and I felt like I was doing it against my own will.
I skated every day when I was like 13, 14, so it was a very abnormal childhood. At 14, I hated skating. I started to hate it because I thought that that's where all my issues stemmed from.
There were so many days where I would show up to the rink, and while warming up, I would just start uncontrollably crying.
Especially as a kid, you know, you don't really know what you want.
14 is when I realized, like, I don't have a mind of my own.
I just didn't have too much freedom. I was set on a schedule that someone created for me. Like, my whole life was just skating.
I would celebrate Christmas by myself. Like, it was horrible.
I'm so tired.
And autonomy is a really important concept in psychology, particularly in something called self-determination theory. This theory suggests that people thrive when three core needs are met: autonomy, competence, and relatedness, which is basically human connection, like being with your friends and family, right? So when someone feels like they have control over their own choices, they're more likely to stay motivated and engaged in what they're doing. And if you look at Alysa Liu's story, autonomy shows up everywhere, from her unique hair, her piercings, and even with how she speaks.
I truly believe there is something very different about Alyssa's brain.
Another part of Alysa Liu's story that many people don't realize is that she has ADHD. And those with ADHD, such as myself, often thrive in environments that allow creativity, novelty, and freedom. However, those with such neurodivergence may struggle in or eventually resist environments that rely heavily on rigid structure or perfectionism, which is why figure skating, unfortunately, tends to fall into that second category. And so for someone with ADHD, that kind of environment can either become overwhelming or force them to find their own way of navigating it, which was why reframing her mindset around the sport helped her get back into it. Now, due to the pandemic and her eventual retirement, Alysa Liu took a long break.
I knew that retirement was the only way for me to get out into the world and do more. First thing I did was go on my first vacation. I got to go to concerts for the first time. I also got my driver's license. I was doing everything I could to make up for lost time. I went on a ski trip in 2024. It was so much of an adrenaline rush. Like, to get down the mountain when your legs are that tired, it's hard, and you have to kind of tap into the side of you that fights. And I hadn't felt that since I quit skating. Skiing made me feel like that fight again, and I was like, well, if I can get what I'm feeling from skating, I should just do that.
So as you can see, by stepping away and exploring more of life outside of skating, this allowed her to reassess what skating meant to her, so whether it should remain at the center of her life or not, and also allowed her to rebuild something that many athletes lose over time, which is what's called intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is when you do something because you genuinely enjoy it and not because of external pressure or rewards. So when athletes lose their internal drive from intrinsic motivation, from there burnout happens, or they don't perform as highly over time. But when they rediscover intrinsic motivation, a major shift tends to happen because the activity stops feeling like a burden or a responsibility, but rather starts feeling like a choice again, or even a hobby that you do just for the heck of it because it's fun. So as you can see for Alysa, skating no longer felt like an obligation, and it didn't feel like something she had to prove to the world for external validation, but rather it felt like something that she simply just loved to do. And that shift from obligation to joy, from approval to authenticity, changes everything. Now, you've probably heard of something called the flow state. And this happens when someone becomes completely immersed in an activity. So with this, time seems to disappear, self-consciousness fades away, and the person becomes fully absorbed in what they're doing. And being in that flow is often described as a state where people perform at their absolute best. Now, one of the best ways to enter the flow is through enjoyment. See, when someone genuinely loves what they're doing, their brain becomes more focused, more creative, and more adaptive. And that is why, from my personal observation, Alysa seems to access the flow state easily. Another quote from her that really stuck out to me was how her goal wasn't to win the gold medal, but rather this.
Do you feel any kind of pressure that now I've got to do the Olympics and I need to win gold?
No. Actually, I'm really excited because my goal, honestly, is just to hype people up, give them an experience, whether it's negative or positive. As long as people are feeling some strong emotions and anticipation, I'm fine with that.
That perspective changes the entire dynamic and competition. Because if your only goal or primary goal is to win, then the pressure can become enormous. So every mistake feels catastrophic. Every performance becomes a test of your talent and value. But if your goal is to instead share something with the audience, to create an experience and be part of an experience, then the performance becomes expressive rather than stressful. Another quote from Alysa Liu that people absolutely loved was when she said,
I love struggling, actually.
You do?
Yeah, it makes me feel alive.
And that sentence strongly correlates with what is called having a growth mindset. So a growth mindset views difficulty as an opportunity to learn rather than evidence of failure. And when someone has a growth mindset, they're more likely to persist through challenges because they see struggle as being part of the process. So when you have something like sports, this mindset can make a huge difference. Because when athletes become afraid of making mistakes, their bodies can tense up and their movements become rigid. But when they accept struggle as part of the journey, they stay more relaxed, confident, and adaptable. She also stated in a Teen Vogue interview that she loves pushing herself and that there's this thing called the AMCC in your brain, and it's where your willpower resides, and that she loves doing things that she doesn't want to do because she gets a kick out of it and it makes her happy. Additionally, with Alysa, she doesn't really see the obligations or attention as pressure, but rather she sees it as another opportunity to be herself. Plus, she even talked about how she views mistakes as being beautiful. This perspective reminds me of a philosophical concept called wabi-sabi, which comes from Japan. So wabi-sabi is the idea that imperfection has its own kind of beauty.
This one's pretty.
Not according to the book. If you go by the checklist, this one's perfect.
But I like how mine's a little off-center. It's got wabi-sabi.
You can't win an argument by making up words.
Wabi-sabi is an Eastern tradition, Dad. It's celebrating the beauty in what's flawed. Like the crack in the Liberty Bell or the mole on Cindy Crawford's face.
The Liberty Bell is great, but come on, if it was in a contest with a bunch of bells without cracks, it would lose.
But sometimes it's the small imperfections that make you love something even more. So what if this rose is a little too short, a little too wide? It's got more personality than those other ones.
But we're out to win.
So essentially, the cracks, flaws, and mistakes are not necessarily things to hide, but rather are things that make an experience more human. And in a sport that has historically emphasized flawless execution, that mindset is incredibly refreshing to see from someone. With Alysa Liu, another interesting detail about her, in my opinion, is that she doesn't seem to care much about the superstitions that exist within figure skating culture. See, for many athletes across various sports, they may have rituals that they believe can bring either good luck or bad luck. For example, some people believe that wearing gold before winning gold is bad luck. But Alysa Liu wore a gold dress to the Olympics anyway, and won gold. This decision of hers can possibly be described by what's called having an internal locus of control. So basically, people with an internal locus of control believe that their actions shape outcomes rather than luck, superstitions, or external forces such as seen in this image. And the tendency to be more active rather than passive directly correlates with higher confidence and resilience because you reserve more of your power and control as opposed to passively waiting on external factors to help and guide you. Alysa Liu has inspired millions across the globe because she has changed the narrative of what success looks like and what it takes to get there. See, for many decades, people believed that greatness requires relentless sacrifice, extreme discipline, and conformity to the system. However, Alysa Liu shows another path. And that's sure, the more traditional path has led to successful careers, but it's not the one and only way to get the job done. See, she shows us an alternative route that is rooted in joy, autonomy, boundaries, authenticity, and prioritizing community while still coming out as number one. And that it is completely okay to step away from something when it stops feeling right, only to then return to it when it finally feels yours again. And that right there is such a powerful mindset to have, especially at such a young age. And with her massive influence and popularity, it shows us that what resonates the most with people isn't perfection, but rather it's someone who lives in full acceptance. Acceptance of themselves, of others, and the detachment from the outcome of whether you win or not.
I really did learn detachment. I started to separate it because I was like, do I really hate skating, or like what did I hate about it? I couldn't experience other things that you can experience in, I don't know, your everyday life.
And finally, she has inspired countless of people across the globe to try out figure skating for the first time or to return back to it in other sports alike, such as how she has inspired me to do so as well. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching, and feel free to check out my other video essays on here about media literacy, mental health, relationships, and more. Bye.